Okay, I think we can start. So hello everyone, welcome to our, from my side, this is the last session before the final presentation. So as I already mentioned, today we're going to have the overview of the project done during the session. So maybe some of you missed some points, so today we are going to make it make it clear for everyone. And as I already mentioned, in case you have any specific clear questions about what is not clear for you, then please let me know. Just write the questions in chat, and I will answer them on them. Right, so just to start the overview, obviously I will start with the database. Every time on all the projects you will have on all the websites, all the any software development, all the applications you will develop, firstly you will need to have the place, the storage where you store the data. Mostly that's the database, especially because usually and mostly work with the web applications. But in fact, as you may already assume it in some way, the data can also be stored on the device, if it's a computer or anything else, or the mobile phone or a smartphone or something else. It can also be the data storage. For example, maybe the most simple example would be the storage is using also the JSON files, XML files, rarely CSV files as well. But yes, the data can also be stored on the computer as an alternative. For example, you of course know that you all have smartphones. We all have smartphones, or that's not really smartphones, but actually you all have a device you can say touch in your hands, and yeah, also you have the computers, obviously, and of course you know that sometimes, but there are the cases where you need to work without the connection to the internet, and in this case you usually don't have you actually don't have the data, you don't have the connection to the data which is stored in the database, right? So in this case you will fetch the data which is stored locally on your computer. And also some solutions on practice are also based on so-called offline regime, offline state. Yeah, and it means that the data is stored locally, can be stored on the computer, and if you have the connection to the internet, then the data will be also shared and synchronized with the data stored in the internet, and it's usually the database. Yeah, but also as an alternative to data storage may be the files. You can create the files and store. In fact, you can store all this data, let's say in JSON file, for example, or in maybe CSV file as well. Why not? Yeah, CSV and XML file. So in theory, this can also be, all these things can also be stored in the local storage using the files. Yeah, but in our case we used I would say the easiest way, and this is the database. And yeah, of course we use this MySQL database. There are different types of database, but yeah, this time we use MySQL. I will not really explain the difference between MySQL databases or other types of data, Oracle database or mainly databases. But yeah, so usually the simple that these are the tables in the database where you have the data. And as I said, this is the first step. When we work with the applications, we should have the place where the data is stored. So this is almost always this is the first place to start. And so we started with the structure. So in our case, we wanted to implement the library where we have the books and we have the libraries, so we can add the books to the libraries. In this case, we actually created some empty copies, but in this case, we can consider this from Java perspective that the books themselves are the classes and the books in libraries are the objects from Java perspective, because the book is just a name and it's just actually the template of the book, which can be created. We can not write the book, but just simply create a copy of the book and then place it in the library. So this is what happens when we add the book to the library. So then we also have the libraries themselves. So the places, the libraries where the books are stored, and we also have the customers. And so all these tables represent correspondingly the books represent the books which can be created. And so in book we have pretty much let's say extended structure. So we have the name, we have author, date published, and for all the fields, as I said, we have a external ID. So external ID, again, as I mentioned several times, is needed to represent the external keys which come from different sources. So again, in this case, we can consider the database, the CSV files, JSON files, and XML files as different storages. And under each storage, in practice, you will always have the IDs. So different kind of IDs, and in this case, we want to store the external ID to be able to work with it. Also, we created the structure of the tables that these external IDs are a secondary key, and we defined the secondary key as unique. So it means that the key should be unique and it can also be null. So the default is null. So again, as I said, if the value is not null, then it should be unique. But if the value is null, so the null values can be repeated. It's not restricted. And this is for all the external keys, external IDs in all the tables. So in this case, it's the same. The ID is the same. And of course, we have the ID itself. So this is the primary key of the table, which should be unique, which we define as the automatically incremented key. So in this case, it's also the same in all tables. So again, for such, let's say, initial structures, we have the books table, then customers table, also the same things, then the libraries. So for such tables, the structure is pretty much the same. But then we have the tables where we have the linkages between the different tables, in the elements in different tables. And here we have the unique key, the unique key of the entry, and so we have the IDs of the libraries and of the books. And so in this case, the libraries and book IDs the IDs of the libraries and the IDs of the books, they can be repeated because we may have different book copies in one library. And externally the same meaning, it should be unique. And yeah, we have the IDs, and this is the usual practice that we have IDs, as I already mentioned, not the names of the books, not the names of the libraries, but the IDs. It makes this table less heavy from the memory point of view, because otherwise if we have the strings everywhere, then of course it could take so let's say if we have also the type, the name of the book and the name of the library here, then this table becomes more heavily from the memory point of view, because it has to store the strings, which is not really good. And in addition, let's say that if you have the strings here, then and you have the strings, the original strings in the books table, then the problem may be that if you change the entry, if you change the string in one place, then in another place it stays the same, which of course also is not good. So we should also, in this case, control that the strings are changed the same way in both places. And of course, in this case, there's absolutely no sense to write the string in this place as well. So we have the ID, which has the unique linkage to the book, and yeah, we thought it is also defined as the index, as the secondary key, as the index. So the index says that it should be linked to the entry from another table. Yeah, and something similar is with the customers, but in this case the customer can borrow the book from the table books library. So in this case the ID will be the ID of the entry under the book, so it means that the customer actually borrows the corresponding book from the corresponding library, and since the ID here is unique, then we can define the scheme the proper way. Yeah. And also, I guess I did it here. It should also be unique. And yeah, this will be unique. This is the primary key, because we cannot, two customers, two people cannot borrow the same book from a library. That's not, the same physical book. Yeah, it's not possible. That's why it's considered as the primary key. And the last table I added, not at the beginning, but a little bit later, but also quite important table for the developers, not for the end users, is the log table, which represents the errors we had in the program. We actually have during the execution of the program. So again, the meaning is quite simple. Every time we have the exception, the error, something could goes incorrectly, then the entry will be then the exception of course will be handled, and then the entry will be entered in the database. So the point is that we have the user who actually uses in this case the web page and the application. So then at the end of the day, so maybe it can happen that the user complains that something goes wrong, something went wrong, something went wrong, and in this case you need to have some kind of log. So in this case you can go to the table and see that timestamps. It means that the 11th of June at this time there was the exception. So I have a stack trace, so I can search where this exception comes from. I can go to edit in this case. So I can see the whole stack trace. I see that the exception was handled on line so that's to post method. So we add an entry, so then it's add an entry on line 55, so it comes from here, and I can actually then go to the code and see what's wrong there, and then also correct it, and escape this issue in future. So for the database perspective, that was it, and then we actually come to the website we have. So I start with the header. So that's the header. Of course, you can, if you want, you can create some kind of home page. In this case, I didn't want to proceed with this. Maybe we don't have so much time to work on the HTML things. So of course we can create some kind of pretty nice home page, starting page. But in this case, we want to in this project we mostly focus on the functionality. And here we have the header, which will be the same for all the tabs we have here. And let's go to the page. And this header, as you know, is defined to have all so all the structures, all the JSPs, all the, let's say, the templates for all the pages we use here. So all these pages we have, all these things, they come from the GSPs. Yeah, so GSPs are considered as the template for all the pages. And so, and what does it mean? It means that each GSP, it has the structure, it has some kind of HTML code, and also it has Java logic, which actually generates the code based on the parameters provided through the page, and mostly in this case we work with the post parameters. Yeah, they can also be get parameters. Also be no, in this case we mostly work with request parameters. They can also be the queries. The queries, it means that again we add something after the question mark on the HTML string. So as you remember, so if we add something like this, one equals some. It means that this is also a parameter for the client. Now the parameter is query parameter. To be more precise, the query parameter client, which has the value 20. So we can also add more parameters. Let's say this client 2 variable has parameter 30, let's say. And so we have two parameters, first parameter, second parameter, and they have the value. So these are query parameters, and if we see it, and we had it so if we open the customer, then we use the query parameter. So in this case, it works in the way that I provide the customer ID, and it opens me the corresponding customer. And so this was the way how we use the query parameters. But mostly we work with the post, with the request parameters. So it means that we have the form. The form is submitted, and the form has the values defined, and then we are communicating between the pages using these request parameters. If we go back to this topic, the JSPs needed to generate the HTML page. So the idea is quite simple. Again, we have something from the HTML forms. Then we can basically we imagine that we include Java code into HTML, and using Java code we generate HTML. So if we have the loops, then we have the loop itself is written in Java and it's executed as Java logic, but inside the loop we can actually add the elements, HTML elements, and then these elements will be included to the page. So not only the elements, we can include some kind of values to the elements, some kind of parameters. So in this case, we have this iterative library, so we can go through all the libraries and then define the reference where we want to go, and then in this case we generate the parameter using Java. And please remember that if we use this kind of symbol, then it means that we can include simply Java code without any return. So we can set some kind of void. Yes, so some Java actions which happen here. Please remember that every time we define on the page we define the variables. Like in this case, we define the variable for iterator. The variable will be available at all the pieces of the page, at all the points of the page. Yeah, so if we define here, then it actually means that I can use it so everywhere on this page. So in this case, the object-oriented programming and all the structured Java approaches, they cannot actually be applied on the JSPs. So here you just have simple plain, let's say plain place to write the code and generate HTML. Also, you can generate JavaScript using Java code, yeah, and also you can simply write. We did not actually generate JavaScript, just a little bit in such cases like we have here keys. So in this case we also, like in this case we generate JavaScript code a little bit. So in this case we have the call of the method of the function if we talk about JavaScript, and then so we generate the parameter that we actually pass to this function call. Yeah, so that's and yeah, please remember again that for the where we actually use JavaScript and where we use Java means that Java is the code which generates us the page. Yes, so what does it mean? It means that we call the page generation. In our case, means that we go to URL. So here I have URL, I press enter, the page is generated. So when at the moment the page is generating, at this point Java code is used. Java code generates the page. Java code and it means that Java also has the connection to the database. It connects to the database. It fetches the data. Then the data is fetched, and we can, but actually Java generates us the page with the content. So this is what generating thanks to Java and with the help of Java. At this point, once the page is generated, nothing is refreshed, we forget about Java. At this point, we have only the parameters already generated, so all these things, and JavaScript code. So also we did not talk about, but mostly so-called jQuery is used. So this is jQuery. It's JavaScript. We can say that this is binary. I'm not really sure how we can define jQuery, but actually this is the we can say this is a set of functions defined in JavaScript, which which provide more advanced control on the page. But yeah, so idea is that everything is generated. Yeah, so we have HTML, we have HTML elements. Of course, we also have CSS, which defines the style and the sizes. If so, it says that that the padding, the size of the letters, the width should have this and this size. Yeah. You can also have some dependencies. Yeah, we did not talk about, but in CSS we can also define the codes. We can define the CSS styles, which can be different based on the size we have. So it means that under the exact size I have here, that the CSS may have one definition, and then if I expand, if I make my screen larger on the page, then this different CSS classes will be. So in this case, we can also use different CSS classes based on the size of the page we use. Based on the width, it can also be based on the based on the width. Right. So yeah, and at this point, the only thing which can make you some changes, some physical changes, so let's say move something on the left and the right, hide something and hide something, this can only be JavaScript. So using JavaScript we can, we haven't talked a lot about JavaScript, we did not talk a lot about JavaScript, but usually on the pages we have so many different handlers. So let's say we have a button, we have even listeners, a little bit different, but yeah, okay, here's also jQuery. But yeah, mostly on some elements you may have the listeners. The listeners means that these are the functions, JavaScript functions, which are triggered once you, let's say, press on the button, once you press something, you do some kind of action on the page, it may trigger JavaScript code based on the definition, of course. And JavaScript code may do some actions on runtime actions on the page, so it is not required to reload the page. It can do the actions at the moment when the page is loaded. So that's about JavaScript. Also, every time also when the page is generated, then we also have some actions in between. JavaScript actions. You have some kind of let's say variables, values stored, and these values can be accessed using JavaScript. So let's say I have the document, then this is the object, and so I can go to console and execute it. So here I can actually, yeah, this is JavaScript object actually, so we can access to it using JavaScript code. Yeah, so I have the methods, which is it, there's no such element, but never mind, you can actually access all the elements loaded on the page using JavaScript. So that's why it's used. So let's say you press on the button and you want to do some actions, you want the page to do some actions, it can be done using JavaScript. Yeah, in fact, there are also different libraries, like again, set jQuery, which have some predefined functionalities. implemented in JavaScript. Yeah, and yeah, so again, this is about the general structure of the web pages, and in addition to it, we can also have the encodes. Encodes mean that we include something on the page. It can be CSS file, it can be JavaScript file, mostly CSS JavaScript, but in addition, in JSP pages, we also have the option to include another JSP page. And in this case, for all the pages, we included the so-called header template page, and this is header template section, and this is this top section of the elements which actually have the navigation between different pages, so for libraries, customers, box, and so on. Yes, so and also here we have it. We also have the styles. Then we install Bootstrap. Then the CSS classes, which are quite popular in most of the web development, and we simply also use the font also to get to use some icons like trash icon or something like that. And for such cases, we used font awesome CSS classes. Yeah, so in this case we actually define the definition we define the elements which are located at all our pages. So yeah, that's the beginning for this. And also we have the references to the elements, and actually these references are the references to the server pages. And so I have them here. So every time we navigate somewhere, we navigate actually to the server pages, server classes. And yeah, the structure of server classes in fact is quite simple, I would say. They have two methods, to post and to get. Do post, that's the, let's say, do get, that's some kind of default method which is triggered once you simply load the page. Yeah? So you go to the page, load it, and then it triggers to get method. Mostly and usually only one of the methods to get to post is used based on the functionality of your page. In our cases, since we use lots of post forms, then we use to post method. And yeah, so we mostly place the logic, not mostly, but we only place the logic on the to post methods. Yeah, and at the end of basically what we have here, we only use the request parameter, and this is the parameter which stores all the elements that come from the previous page. Again, if we use for methods here, so maybe before we continue, let's again remind you about the forms. So on HTML, for HTML pages, we have the forms, and each form actually, so maybe it's not so important, but the important things are the action and the method. Yeah, method, I only use post. It means that it triggers the post request to the page, and the page is defined here. Yeah? So we have the action, that's the page where we go once the form is submitted, and the method actually describes if that's the post or get or whatever it is. Yeah, should be post or get. I remember there is one more, but not so important. Yeah, and so it means that everything what we have inside the form, let's say all the input parameters, they may have the IDs, which is, again, as I said, mostly used by JavaScript, and the name. And this is the name of the field, which will then go to the generation of the new page, of this page. And the forms can be submitted. You can submit the form manually, but using JavaScript code. And so you get the object of the form, then you call the method submit, then the form will be submitted. But mostly it happens using the buttons. So you have submit buttons. By default, all the buttons are submit. Have the type. And so this is what I used here. Yeah, submit button, that's the default. If we delete it, this will also be considered as the submit button. So it says that when I press on the corresponding button, which it has type submit, then the form it is located in will be submitted. So what does it mean? It means that it will actually go to this page, which is defined here, and it will pass all the parameters we have here. So they have the names. So each parameter will have the ID, which is described as the name, and then the value, which will actually be the value of this parameter. Like in this case, we have the with library ID input name. So it means that the with library ID element will have the value of this input once we submit the request. So we'll go to this page, we submit. So we submit the request, we go to this page, and then the value for this the with library ID input will be field will be populated, and we can actually get it from the request form. So this request object will store all these elements submitted from the form. Yeah. And so using this one, we can actually get all the elements from the form. In addition, we can also pass new elements, then which will be available once we are on GSP page, and at the end of each. Again, at this point, it only calls the servlet. So set up this code, then on the servlet you can do whatever you want. Yeah, but in this case, what I say, on all the servlets I used here, at the end I redirected to the GSP page, and I passed the request parameter. So it means that do post is called, yeah, so the post request is submitted. Then I have the values which come from the form from where I submit this request. And so the values will be here. And so yeah, I have all these values, and I then can do whatever I want with these values. I can also ignore them if it's needed. Yeah, so since we have different forms, we may have different parameters in each form. And so based on the form submitted, the set of the parameters may be different. So I can do some checks. I can verify which form is submitted, which button is pressed, and based on this I can have different processing. Yeah, so then I have these values which come to this method, and yeah, so at the end here are these mentions. I can add new parameters to the request, which will then be available on the GSP page loaded here. Also, I can do some actions which are not dependent on the parameters provided, so there can be some reading from the database, some default data. Right, and at the end we simply call GSP page with the new values provided from here. And then we forward the request, and this is basically what we did for all the servlets we have here. And so that's this schema is applied, this approach is applied for all the pages we have here. Yeah, so yeah, so now let's maybe, so if you have any questions about what we've done on the general schema, please let me know. But yeah, now let's talk in details what did we do in particular. So for most cases we use some kind of data provided from the database, right? So basically what happens, the class, the page is called, then this goes to servlet page all libraries. So based on the link provided, of course, goes to the page all libraries. So here is the servlet page, and then I read the entries from the database. And so here I have this method. I initialize the database. Of course, if it comes from the form submit, then I may have some different actions to be done here. But by default, I will always have the read from the database. And let's have this set all entries. In this case, you will see it. We need to go to the class we actually initialized. And yeah, so I have these classes, and I have method add all entries. So basically, the idea here is simple. It simply reads all the libraries and sets them to the as the list. In this case, that's the array list. Oh no, that's the map. And so it has the ID and the library struct, the library object. And basically, now we have the collection. We have the map collection of the libraries. And the same is for the books in other pages and so on. So basically, simply we call the method, then we get the values of the from the database, and we set the collection to the request. And you can see that the request is used. Let's these breaks, and yeah, so then the value is set to the request. So does it mean? It means that at the point when we load the GSP page, at this point we will have this list of the libraries available. So I can simply cast it to libraries. Yeah, we cast it because by default it's returned as the object. So the program does not know. At this point, the program does not know the exact type of the library of this attribute. If it can also be all. Yeah, in this case, that's why we need to use the casting operation here. And yeah, so now I have these libraries, and I can simply generate these entries. I have here. Yeah, so I have these entries, and what do? I iterate through all these entries. Yeah, so I define some predefined HTML structure, HTML opening tag. Yeah, that will be opening tag, and then this will be closing tag. So inside start, I place all the libraries. So and then I use Java code here. I generate all the entries, and yeah. So this means that I have while loop, and under each iteration of while loop, I am located on the position that I have this library. So I have each library with all the details, with all the keys I have here, external IDs. So I can simply use these values for each entry. And this is what I do. I create yeah, I create the group of the elements. And so these are these elements. So for each entry, so this will be the name of the library, then the trash icon. Actually, in this case, it's the trash icon and the rename button. And so for each entry, I generate them. What are the specifications for them? First of all, I have the in this case, actually I have more than just what we see on the screen. I have the entries for the display, which is defined as the division, and in addition, I also have the elements to provide the input. So by default, this is hidden. But what does it mean? It means that when I press rename button, then I will enable all the input elements where I can type some code, and then I can I hide all the elements which are meant for the display. Yeah, maybe for you it's a little bit complicated, but again, you don't need to use all these approaches. What I said. Basically, in your projects, do what you can. It's not mandatory that you implement all these cases here. Maybe for your case, it's absolutely fine if you don't use a rename function. That's not the most important thing. Again, as I said, in your projects, please do what you can. So what you can do, if it's simple or in the more advanced level, that's up to you again. There is nothing that there's nothing you should know everything here. Yeah. So do as much as you can. There's no strict definition. Yeah. I'm just showing the approaches you can apply. If you don't understand or if you're not sure about some of these approaches, that's absolutely fine. For the beginning, this may look complicated, I agree, and that's why I'm just simply showing you how it can be used. So we have lots of generations. Generations from the to generate point of view. Yeah. So for each element we have the specific ID, which then can be used in JavaScript code. So in this case, maybe we will not go deep on the definition. So how it is defined here, I want to mention that using the IDs, we can control these elements on the page. When the page is loaded, again, so I can use JavaScript code and manipulate with them. So then I have so the button can be interpreted as trash icon, so it means that the button may be represented as trash icon, and so each in this case sometimes I define the buttons as not submit buttons, but simply as button. So does it mean? It means that it usually means that before I want to submit the form, I want to do some corrections. So in this case, I use such kind of trick that since we have lots of elements, to make it easier to read the value from the backend, from Java, from server, I can simply, before the form is submitted and then it sends the request to the servlet, I add the value to this delete library ID, to this delete library input element, this one. And so I fill it with the value, and the value is the key of the entry to be deleted. So I will have, like in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, many libraries, but only when I press on the button. So let's say for one of these entries I press on the button, then this button has this JavaScript code. Yeah, so in this case that's JavaScript code. Each button has this JavaScript code, but the difference is that each of these buttons, and maybe I can also show you for the inspect element. Each of these buttons, these trash icons, trash buttons, they have different JavaScript. Yes, so in this case, similar but different JavaScript code. Yes, so in this case, this has value 6, then this button has value 29, and so on. Yeah? So in this case, we generated different JavaScript codes for different buttons, and so since since this is on-code event, it means that this JavaScript code is triggered when we press on the button. Yeah, we press on the button. Then what happens? I simply pass the value to this delete library ID. Then the form is submitted. So I can easily then understand that I want to read this this one field, which has the ID of the entry to be deleted. Yeah. So, and this kind of trick, I guess I used it several times. That's yeah, also for library name we have something to rename that. Same approach is used. Yeah, so actually from these buttons, from these inputs, I actually changed the value of these two, of one of these two strings, elements. Yeah, so this is how the generation happens. Also, for each element I generate the ID, so it means that this will also be generated, then it won't be changed on the page once the page is generated. So in this case I used this kind of array approach to yeah, for IDs it's needed on the local level, yeah, for JavaScript level, for the names. Again, this is needed at the point when we submit the request and then read the data from the servant. Yeah. So what else we have here? Of course, in this case I use some kind of approaches to hide the display fields. So my first name, I hide the display field, and then I have and I display the input field. So then I hide the button name, and I display these two buttons, save and cancel. Then again, when I press cancel, then we go back to the initial screen, and this is done by JavaScript code. So here I have this JavaScript code. Here when we press on the name, when we press on cancel, then this this logic is executed. We don't have such for save, because for save the logic is more simple. We don't need to hide anything, we don't need to display, we just need to press save, and then it submits the form. Yeah, so in this case this is how the approach looks like. In addition, what do we have? I added the href for each element, for each library. So that means that we can press on the library and then it navigates to the corresponding link. So the idea is that it navigates to the library server page, but in addition, what does it have? It has the query parameter, which represents to which library we want to go. Yeah, if we change it, then we go to the third library. And so that's the link, and this link is actually processed on the library page. Yeah, so actually the template for the library page will always be the same, but the difference is which library we want to display in. So in this case, this part is considered as the library. If we remove the query, then nothing here will happen. Yeah, of course we can implement some kind of exception handling for such cases, but we do not consider such case. Yeah, we should have we assume that we should have the query parameter here. Yeah, and so what that means, again, we go to this link, and then this link is taken in library settled. This is not needed. The file version, and from here I can actually read library ID from query. So I have this query string, then I can parse this string as needed and get library ID from here. So basically I read this query from the URL, and I fetch the library ID from here. Yeah, so then I read library ID from the query, and then based on this library ID I can return the corresponding content used for this exact library I pressed on. Yeah, and then we have all these things. Yeah, so again, before we continue, so on our libraries, as you remember, we have this rename fields, delete fields, and so on. Basically, the idea, as I said, is quite simple. I press on the button, I press on the corresponding button, I fill the JavaScript fields the entries for each field, for the fields needed, and then this field is passed to the servlet, to the request here. So there is the value of the field, and then we can actually use this value and implement the logic, and implement and call and trigger the logic for each number. So let's maybe take a look on one specific element we had. We have this, yeah, so we can rename, but yeah, the idea was that we can also insert the library. So it means that I simply pass the string and press the button insert, then the request will have this insert button, which is defined under the GSP page, and yeah, the button name is insert the library. So if the button is pressed, then this request parameter will not be null, it will actually be empty string, and so then we can insert the library at the entry. It will, I'm not sure why we pass the response here, since we don't use it, but okay, never mind. And it actually inserts new entry, so simply reads the request, and it reads library name and it inserts it to the database. Yeah, so that's about the insert, and since we are here, Anastasia asked to explain about the export. So for the export, the idea is that we want to, yeah, basically the second major task for this project was to be able to fetch the information from the JSON and CSV XML files, then to actually transport it from the files to here, to the database. Actually, then of course this will be displayed here. On the other side, we also have the export function, which will actually export the data to the corresponding file type. So basically, what do we have here? We start with the file type. but this is hard-coded selection list. So this is defined here. So if we have drop down, this is selection list. You have select as the name. Yeah, so selection, have starting tag, ending tag, and we have the name of the selection, specific name of this particular selection, which is here. And so we have 4 elements, and these elements defined as the options. Yeah, each option has the value which is not shown on the screen, but which then will be available for us when the form is triggered. When submit form is triggered, then this value will actually be available next to this export time. Yeah, so it means that if we select CSV, so this is just the label displayed, but actually then this value will be sent to the servlet page. So again, selection, the name of the selection, let's say name of the attribute, then based on which, let's say we select XML, then this value will be passed to the submit request. Okay, JSON is selected, then this value will be passed. Yeah, so this is the selection. So each option, yeah, I also by default I select by default empty option selected, but of course we need to select one of these files. So then the next step is that I simply have this input name. This input name. This is just a simple input file or input element. And so we write simply the text. Then once the form is submitted, then this text will be passed next to this name. Yeah? So maybe I can also show you again. Every time you want to check how the post parameters are parsed, you need to open its inspect element. Then just simply open it and do some action. Say in this case I said that I want to export to say XML demo export. Yeah, so this will be the name of the file. And in my case I actually maybe let's press export. In this case that's the simple button, that submit button, which will then trigger just simply submit of this form. Because we don't need such large form, but okay. So then press export. Then what we see that these parameters are parsed to the form, but actually don't need all these parameters. We need only in theory we don't really need these parameters, but I need this export parameter and I need this file name. Yeah, in theory we can also split it into several forms. This will be even more precise, but in this case it's fine that we keep it this way. So simply I pass this export. I press export button, then it means that this parameter will appear here. And so it indicates us that we pressed the button. Then I have this file name, so which will be actually this input what was here. And the selection list, this is what I said, we have export type as the name of the selection, then the value for the corresponding selection. Yeah, that was XML. So we use these 3 parameters, and then what happens next? Next I just simply need to process these parameters on the servlet page. Yeah. So from here, once these parameters are provided here, then these parameters are passed to the request. Yeah. So these 3 parameters, what we are interested in, they are passed to the request, to the post request. So then we go here. Yeah. So they now go to this method do post. At this point we have all these three parameters. The parameter which says that we pressed the button, the parameter which says what's the name of the file we provided, and then the third parameter is that the value we selected from the drop-down list of the file type. And this is this case. Yeah, so this is export case. It says that we pressed on the export button. At this point it is not null. It says that we pressed on this button. Also, we want to be sure that export type is provided. Otherwise, it does not make sense. We'll check if it's not null, and of course we'll check that it's not initial, because again, if the export type is initial, it again doesn't make sense. Because we should know, of course, the type of the file we want to create. Yeah. So at this point, based on the export button pressed, the export type selected, we understand that we actually that the user wants to fill the file name, fill the export type, and at this point, yeah, we don't know about the file name, but we know that the user pressed the button, and then the user selected the type of the file to be created. And at this point, what happens? First, we have this file type class we defined here, and this is our universal, universal object class for all the file types. Always we start with the generation of the instance. Again, at this point we have export type, which can be CSV, XML, or JSON. At this point we get instance based on the file type, and basically we can see this method here. Get instance, it actually creates the instance of the corresponding class. We provide the corresponding class, the corresponding type we provide as the file extension. So then we select one of these types, and it then returns us the instance of, in this case if we selected XML, it will return the instance of XML class, right? So nothing specific here. That's the first step. We want to have the right class to process the file. So, and then the next step is simple, that we export. We call the method export libraries, and this is the method which is implemented in all these three classes: CSV, JSON, and XML. And here we provide the path name. In this case, I have this kind of long path. In this case, I just simply hard-code the path which is on my computer. So that's the folder. Also, you can provide, if you want, for your projects, you can provide the full path from here. So this would be. So you can also do the way. You can do it this way, that you provide the full path here. So this would be, say, this. It's this way. This will be this way, so you can just simply provide the full path. So you could address this text. And so you can provide the full path, and then you can say file name, simple file name. It also adds the option. So you can provide the full path, that's 5 options up. In my case, I just simply hard-code it, so you can do as you want. In this case, it's not so important. I just simply want to simplify the input. That's why I hard-code this value, this part. And then I just simply concatenate the string. I concatenate the strings and the file name. So this is the parameter I pass from here. And so this is the file name. Then input parameter. Then I can get it here. Yeah, so on this, then I have export type parameter. I just write it lowercase just to not confuse anyone. And so, yeah, so that's export type, and then I actually have the full path for the file. So yeah, and at this point we know the type we want to export the libraries to. We know the file name, and now the next option, or not the option, but the next step for us is to generate the file. So again, in this case we work with the simple files. These are simple text files, actually CSV, XML, and JSON. They are all plain text files with a specific structure. Yeah, in this case we actually generate the text file. Yeah. So of course if you work with binary files, then it's maybe something more complicated. In our case these are just simply text files with the content of XML, with XML, JSON, or CSV contents. Yeah, so nothing special here. And yeah, so this is the base idea. We want to generate the text with the specific format. Yeah. And of course we want to provide them. In this case we provide them the libraries we have in the database. And so the data of the libraries we have in the database. So then I go to the, yeah, maybe first of all let's check the result. We just of the XML file we just generated. So a moment. We'll open it. Here we go. So yeah, this one just generated, and so it generates us the content with the entries actually received from the database. Okay, so simply ID and the name. Yeah, so that's our point. We want to generate the file with all these entries. Yeah, and now we can actually go to this method. Again, for each class, it will be located for each of these classes, CSV, XML, JSON, it will be located. It will be implemented differently based on the file structure, of course. And so here is this method. Yeah, so we simply need to have the file name, and all the other things do not depend on anything. And then just simply everything depends on the file name. In this case, I read. Yeah, so maybe let's just go step by step. So first of all, yeah, please remember that I just didn't mention now, but before I have different database manager classes. I use them. So we use them to create the logic needed for the databases, for the actions for the actions on the database data. Okay, so again, it's different. Maybe we could maybe do it a little bit different. We can maybe move one method to another one, to different. We can split the methods differently between the classes, but maybe it's not so important. The main idea is that we have these classes which we can actually use. The interesting point about these classes is that we have this connection static, so it means that I only access the connection from the static from the database manager. So that's after the class, and all the classes, all these classes are the subclasses of this database manager. And so we have some generic methods needed for all these classes, but the key point here is that in this class we control the connection to the database. And maybe also some simple methods, like some common methods like get data, initialize the connection every time, and at the end we close the connection. To the database. But again, let's go back to this export libraries. So in this case, first of all, I want to get the library export from the database, and this is what I done here. So in this case, I have the collection of the libraries. So here I have library structure, as you normally for each library we have the ID, external ID, and name. In addition, we have external ID here as well. Use it. So simply have the collection with the libraries. Each of them has the ID, name, and the external ID if such is provided in the database. So basically, all the data from the libraries database table. And then the idea is quite simple. I need to construct XML file. For JSON file, I construct JSON file. For CSV, I construct CSV file. And then we just basically construct the XML file. So it is simple, and I do some default steps for XML, and then I have the root element here. Then I append this root element, and under each root element I can append sub-elements, which then can have also their sub-elements and different nodes, and of course the parameters of nodes. So maybe about the generation of XML files. So for XML files, we mostly have two main things. We have the element, which is this thing, and then we have the parameter, which is in this case we didn't use the parameter, but the parameters are something like that. So these are the attributes of the elements, and also the values of the elements. So this is the value of the element name. And the sub-elements, each element may have multiple sub-elements. In this case, the library element has child elements and they have values in this case. So basically, I just simply construct it here. So I have the element, I create the element, and then I add the sub-element under the element. So this will be the child. And so I just simply do this stuff here, and just simply construct this XML document. Also again, I set text content, which will be the value of the element. So this is what I do. So here we just simply generate XML file, the same we do for CSV and for JSON. At the end, what do? I transform this XML file to string. Since again we want to have this file as the text, and I write to file. Write to file is the method I move it to the file type. File type was because it's the same for all the file types. If we have XML, if we have JSON, if we have CSV, so all we need to generate the file is the file path, and so where this file will be stored and what's the name of the file and the file content. So what will be stored inside this file. Again, all these files they can be stored as the plain text. So then I here have the content of the file, so generated here, and then I have the name of the file with the file path provided. And so this is simple. I use file writer. I simply generate file writer, provide the file path, file name, and also the character sets. That's maybe important, especially for the flattening characters. Then it should be UTF-8. And then I simply write the content to the file. Then I post it right. And this is it for the export that we have here. So there's mostly about most of that request of else here. Maybe I will also share the point of the session. So this will start at so a moment. I'll show the time code. So it was half an hour ago. Or 10 minutes ago. Okay. So so yeah, that's about the file exporting. Actually, maybe let's shortly can discuss about the structure we have. So as I mentioned, we have this database manager class. So we have some default methods which we can use in all the places, in all the classes, and yeah, also the initialization of the set and the closing of the connection. So in this case, nothing special is here. But as I mentioned, I also mentioned, we have this logging approach. Yeah? So in database, instead we have this table where we store the log data, yeah? All the exceptions, all the errors, we can store them in this log table. And we also fill this log table from the database manager class. And that's why I have the static methods, which will simply add the corresponding exception stack trace to the tables. It will just simply add it to the database table. And so we don't have any internal tables, just everything directly will be placed to the database table. So this is the approach we have here. Mostly we place this log message methods under the exceptions. And so every time we have the exception handout, we simply call this method. Please put the exception to the database. Here. Don't really remember where did we. Actually, yes, we used it in most of the pages. Yes, I have this try catch. Then catch is here, and I simply put this error message to the log. Yeah. Also, one more thing, what we used is the log of the, that was the log we used for this page, log from file. So here, here, as you remember, we had this approach which we could actually apply for all the pages, but in our case we only applied it to one page. Is the list of the errors and successes, just the list of the errors and successes what we have during the processing. So this means that all the errors or some exceptions which occurred during the processing, they all are put to this to these tables, and then at the end GSP page here on the GSP page, we actually display all these exceptions, all these errors moments. Yeah, so here we display them. So if anything is wrong, then if something, let's say the entry is added or something like that, then of course this will be placed to the screen. So here we use the screen and we simply place it. Otherwise, for the exceptions, the errors, we display them in red. So we go through each error and we display it. Alright, so that was about the exceptions. About the exception, and also I used this interface, but maybe that was just simply to show it. Yeah, maybe that's not so. It was not so effective in our project, but yeah, we used the interface. So here I just simply defined the methods which are needed for such database classes where we need to set entries, need to change entry, because in this case it's maybe not needed for error administration database manager, but it's needed for the libraries to actually set all the libraries to the request change entry. So for such classes we may use, but not for all the classes. Yeah. But in this case we actually can apply the interface, and we did not actually implement that separately. But yeah, in theory we could also implement it separately for these actions. Maybe again in this case I think that was not maybe so important for us. Just actually have to find a place where to use the interfaces. On practice you may use interfaces a lot and you may not use interface a lot. It depends on which area you work. Interfaces are quite popular, I would say, but it depends. It depends where we use them. Actually, in some area, in some package, you will find that there are lots of interfaces, or another package you may see that only the abstract classes are used. Yeah, it can be different. Maybe on our project, the interfaces were not so important as well. But just for usage, we created one. Yeah, so that was about the interface. Also, for each class, we have to ensure that, of course, the super constructor is called. And in this case, we must do it this way because we throw the exception in. So since the constructor throws the exception, then of course we cannot simply have the default constructor. We need to have such constructor which then calls the superclass. So with the constructor of the superclass, and for each class, for each this database manager class, the idea is simple, that each class is responsible for the actions to be done on the database level. Basically, we call the queries, update, insert, read, select queries. And so this all these things we placed them into the library database manager classes. Yeah, maybe about the GSP page, and I think that there are some things which were not maybe quite clear. Yeah, and I may also agree with you that such things may be complicated, and this is about the generation of the IDs of the fields. In this case, I actually generated them using this quite straightforward approach, which is simply create this like kind of array elements for them and provide the IDs. Then I can actually parse them on the circuit and read these elements and get the right one out of that. And this may be, let's say not quite one, but a little bit complicated, so maybe this thing can again, if you don't really understand how to use them, you can actually skip them. Again, as I said, do as much as you can do. So if you create the page where you don't have these runtime actions, let's say when you can insert new library, this can also be fine. Yeah, if you manage to delete library, that's also fine. Same for the customers. Again, in the case that's not be the library, that may be something else. So in this case, I think some things may look a little bit complicated. I agree. Yeah. So this is about this case. Yeah. Also for the files. In this. So for database classes, I guess that's clear. All the things are related to the database actions. In the files class, we have this main class, which is file type, and based on this class, we actually this is abstract class. So it defines the structure for the subclasses, for each subclass. In this case, again, as I said, we have CSV, JSON, and XML. We have this get instance method, which is, as I said, that's the factory method, which produces the corresponding file type class. Yeah, so in this case, we generate one of these classes based on the file extension. Yeah, so in this case, we use this factory method approach. Yeah, from my experience, factory methods are used a lot. Yeah, also for XML, as you remember, in XML class there are factory methods as well. Yeah, maybe not such factory methods, but you'll find there are factory methods which return you the instance of the class based on the parameter you provide to it. So this is what we've done here, actually. Yeah. So and then I return the corresponding type. Otherwise, if the file extension is not correct, then it will throw the corresponding exception. Yeah. So and then we have these abstract methods, which then should be which are implemented in all these subclasses. And so these are the same, and one non-abstract method, write to file. This is the method which is the same for all these methods, for all the implementations of these methods in all the subclasses, Right. So and then on each subclass and each file type method, we do the main logic to get books. So then simply I have file content of JSON file, and then I simply process this JSON file and get the corresponding values I need to enter to add the entry to the database after that. Or actually, not the database, just simply to read the data. Then I can use whatever I want with this, do whatever I want with this file. So the same for the libraries. Again, I simply use this JSON content and I get the libraries from it after that. So then also export. This is what we already done through. For JSON files, it's quite simple. I simply use JSON writer and it generates the JSON file from the library. It can generate JSON file from the collection. Yeah? So it's quite effective way of. So JSON files have just straightforward library where it can just simply pass the value and it will generate us JSON object, and then we can simply write it. Yeah, so for get box libraries, quite simple. I have the content of the files for the file, then I have this. I read the linkages between the box and file and libraries from the file. The same is for other classes. Maybe I will not go deeply here. And then we have this input processor. This is the class I created to have something in between the in place where we actually use it and in the place from where this class is called, from where this file types are created and methods are created and the actual these classes and the actual objects of these classes. Yeah, so basically this method is used to not this method, but this class is used to actually to have the additional control on the processing of the file. Yeah, so we have this file type, which file processor, which is one of these classes. Yeah, so here we actually define what kind of file is what kind of class is responsible for the file processing. Then we have the file pass. Yeah, so where we can actually read it, and then I have this set file processor, which actually sets them, sets all these things, and also we have file pass, which is taken also from the file name. And then I can have some such generic methods like read file content, can get file type, which actually reads the file extension from the file path, then process libraries file. Yeah, so these methods are again in between the place we actually call these methods from and the actual method from the file processor, because again the file processor may be different. So in this case, usually from the at the place where this method is called, we don't know the type of the file processor. Yes, in this case we have one place where we call this method, then that this place does not care about the file type and just simply says please process the libraries. Yeah, if it's JSON, XML, or CSV, the place from where this method is called, this place does not care. Just simply do what you are supposed to do. Yeah, and from here it already knows the file processor object. It already has it with the type. It's CSV, XML, JSON. And simply then it gets the libraries, and the returning type is the same for all these classes, and then we simply get the content the same for the process box file, also the same for the box, and yeah, also the same for the libraries box. In this case, this was a little bit more complicated because here we have the external IDs read from the file, and then we actually need to get the internal IDs from the external IDs first, and then only after that we can fill these entries. Alright, so that's actually about this input process. So this is, in this case, we consider this as the buffer in between the satellite classes and these classes. So yeah, that's it about files, library, or not library, files package. And for the object structures, that's quite simple. So here we may have some different objects. Mostly they represent the entry in the database table. We can, of course, may extend them, like the library, not library, yeah, like book library and database. It's just simply book ID and library ID. In this case, we can also extend it more and also have the external IDs for the books and book name. In this case, that's not prohibited. We can extend it and then reuse it as we want. Yeah, so that's I guess quite simple. Just simply object structures which represent the corresponding object. And again, if additional parameters are needed, we simply define them here. So, and the last is pages, which is basically the set what pages needed for each page we have on the website, on our application. Alright, so I guess that's practically it. That's it for the summary we have here. Do you have any more questions about project done? Again, yeah, please remember that on Wednesday, until Wednesday, wants to receive your versions of your projects. I mean, that's maybe not the final version, but I want to go through what is down there and I want to take a look and see what's done to actually understand before what was done before the final presentation on Friday. The plan of the presentation will be the same as for the previous course. You just first you need to again, the sequence may be up to you, but what you need to present is firstly how you split your project in groups, or since you work in groups, 2 or 3, how you split the work, what approaches you use, like you use Jira, and also show Jira board, how the Jira looks like. This I did not contact. Actually, I contacted Zander, but I'm not sure how many people from Accenture will come to this final presentation. But don't worry, it's just a presentation to show, I guess. So in this case, if you implement, at least again, maybe not so complicated as I did here, but at least if you implement the reading from the files, then reading from the database, exporting to the database, maybe changing for the database, this will be considered as quite a nice achievement. So as basically on this project we have here, I actually wants to include as many topics from our course as we have. And actually, I guess maybe I'm not sure, but I guess I succeeded with this part here. So we used all the I used all the main concept of object-oriented programming. I used the encapsulation. Yeah, we used protected private methods. I used the subclasses. I used the abstract classes. Yeah, maybe interface I not use a lot, but the main concept of the abstract classes is used, and also the main concept of the subclasses and the superclasses is used as well. Also, static methods are used. Static attributes are used as well. So yeah, basically these are the main things for this final project to collect or to implement as many approaches, as many styles we discussed in our course. Yes, so from your side, again, please on Wednesday, please send me the projects you have, and again, once on Friday, you'll need to first present how you organize the project work, and so Jira, how you split your work. Also, managed to create the branches on different tasks, and then the branches are linked to the Jira tickets. You can also show it as well. I guess since we have only 2 groups, I hope that there won't be any time restrictions. So that's I guess will be great for you, so you won't have any time limits. And yeah, so that's the first step, and then the second step is to show the solutions. Again, if you have maybe lots of code as I have here, so maybe you don't need to just go through all the classes, all the methods, maybe to explain it in general. Yeah, also please try to mention all the approaches you use. Again, subclasses, abstract class, inheritance, yeah, abstract classes, maybe locks as well. Yeah, factory methods. Yeah, basically as much as you can. So from the style point of view, please cover them in the presentation. And of course, you'll need to show how your solution works. Yeah. So that will also be the key point of the presentation. Right. So yeah, guess that's it from my side. Thank you for all these sessions that we had in our courses, and so now the final week, the final run for us before the final presentation on Friday. So please let me know if you have any questions, if you need any help. I will always be ready to support you, and then please send me your projects by Wednesday so I can take a look on them before the final presentations. So thank you very much, and please proceed with your projects, and then meet you all on Friday again, so on the final presentation. Thank you, and so it's up to you. Now it's time for you. Bye.